Caton, thank you for putting up with us, and we appreciate you being with us here on this Friday morning. First of all, I just wanted to get your reaction to Rich Strike winning the Derby, and why isn't he racing here?
Well, I think the initial reaction is disappointment just to not get the chance to see him after all the excitement of the Derby. But I will say that the connections are doing what they believe is in the best interest of their horse and in their best chances to win the next race, which is the Belmont Stakes. So, I can't argue with that. I can't argue with the people doing what they think is the right thing for their horse. They know him better than anybody. But I really do wish he were here, because I think it adds just that element of excitement, and it also is makes it a different type of puzzle to solve. But I am looking forward to seeing him in the Belmont Stakes, hopefully. And it'll be interesting to see if this triggers some changes or some more serious consideration to changing the schedule as far as the Triple Crown races and their spacing is concerned. There's been a lot of talk about that for years, really, and debate, the traditionalists versus those who want to see some evolution and take that away as an excuse for why horses like Rich Strike don't end up running in there. I think that'll be a long time before they make that decision, but I think they probably will think about it more now.
Okay, so Rich Strike came out of nowhere to win the Kentucky Derby. So recency bias, a lot of people are thinking, maybe there's a dark horse in this field that can come out of nowhere and do this, even though that performance looked like it's not going to be repeated for a long time. However, do you think there are any dark horses in this race that stand a chance?
Well, I think there's horses that nobody's talking about as much as the favorites, but I think the more likely situation is that a favorite or a horse that we've talked about is going to win. Now, I'm actually using for second and third a horse named Creative Minister, who will be a decent price, but he's not a dark horse on the same terms as Rich Strike. And those horses that are in this field, because it's a 9-horse field as opposed to 20, or in this case 21 last for Derby, you're just not going to see an 80-1 shot. But the longest shots, I think, should be the longest shots, and I don't see them winning. So I'm focusing on the favorites.
We're talking with Caton Bredar, horse racing analyst and handicapper for TBG. And Caton, pardon me if this is an ignorant question because you're the expert here and I'm not, but outside of the length, what makes the Preakness different than the Derby?
But first of all, it's the timing. You rarely see horses at this level coming back off of a race like the Kentucky Derby and running back in 2 weeks. So the timing of it is unique. The fact that it's part of a progression, it could be one race in isolation, but it's not. It's always grouped together with the Triple Crown. So it's always sort of at the mercy of, as far as the field is concerned, what's happened in the Derby. Horses that have run well or come close are maybe more apt to take a shot and run back in 2 weeks. They wanted to have that moment. And in terms of prestige, it carries more prestige than almost any other 3-year-old stakes race or any other stakes race in horse racing for that matter. Still limited to only 3-year-olds. So it's unique in that, like the Belmont Stakes and the Derby, it's only one shot. You've only got that one opportunity in a horse's life to try for it. So it leads to trainers doing things that they normally wouldn't necessarily do, run back in 2 weeks, travel to Pimlico to run a longer distance than many of them have run before if they're new shooters in the group. And that kind of leads to its own set of chaos. But it is a special race. It's one of the oldest stakes races in America. And that in and of itself makes it prestigious and kind of sets it apart.
Caton, at the Kentucky Derby, people who had Epicenter probably suffered a very bad beat because Epicenter looked like he was running an incredible race and did not win because of Rich Strike down the stretch. So looking at Epicenter in this race, do we expect another strong showing from Epicenter?
Oh, Chelsea, that is such a good point. And yes, I do, and I think most people do. He's going to be the favorite. But if you look at history, horses that have run as Epicenter did run really, really well and were expected to win or come very close in the Derby, and that didn't, that then came back at Pimlico, have had a great success rate. But the most important thing to me is that he was arguably the best horse in the Derby. He didn't win, but I think the pace of the race contributed to that. He was going into it the most consistent 3-year-old we've seen all along. He's not pace dependent, doesn't have to be on the lead. He does have enough speed to be there if he's asked to do it. And he looks great coming out of the Derby. So I really think it's Epicenter's race to win or lose.
Caton, I know there's all sorts of different factors when it comes to betting horse racing and things you look at, which is, to me, what makes it so fascinating. But one of those big factors is certainly post position. How much consideration do you put into that?
I will always look at post to try to see how the race is going to play out in terms of where speed horses are and aren't. But certainly in comparison to the Kentucky Derby, post position is not as big a factor. It's always a smaller field. So if you draw the outside, you don't lose as much ground as you do in the Derby. It's also not as bad a thing to draw the inside post positions as it is in the Derby, because you don't have as big a risk of crowding, and sometimes drawing toward the inside can be an advantage, as you can establish position early and you can save ground going that longer distance. That can come into play. So, every once in a while there'll be a horse that you think maybe if he draws to the inside, it's a disadvantage. Maybe he gets a little claustrophobic or isn't as quick out of the gate, so that compromises his chances. In this year's Preakness Stakes, I don't see that being as big a factor. And the way they drew, I think that post position is not going to be any excuse.
All right, Caton, simple question. Who do we like this weekend?
Yeah, I wish it were that simple, right? It's like hitting a parlay. I am going to go for Epicenter. I really feel strongly that he is the right favorite and he's going to run a big race. I'm also using Creative Minister, whose connections paid $150,000 just to supplement to the field. I think he might be the best shot of a price horse that finishes well. And then Early Voting is a new shooter who will have some speed, so I'm going to use him in the trifectas, but the top pick for me is Epicenter. And the million-dollar question everybody keeps asking me is about the filly Secret Oath. She's a great story. I think she's going to run really, really well, but horse for horse, I really believe Epicenter is the better of the two right now, but it could be a heck of a horse race.
Kate, before we let you go, I've asked this to a couple of horse racing analysts and followers, and it's about parimutuel versus fixed betting. Do you think that's something that long-term horse racing needs to provide, which would, I think, give it a little more cachet and maybe attract more bettors?
I think it's very possible. It's going to be a long time in the process of figuring out how you would implement it, because we've been for so long in the parimutuel mode. But now with more and more betting across the board, I think, and also the fact that people are betting via computers and not on site with so much more money involved, and the timing of things becomes so critical, I think fixed odds are definitely a part of racing's future.